Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. You are in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza. I'd like to give salutations to David that could make the podcast today. And he is missing out on a treat because today we are talking to the self-proclaimed anxiety warrior. I wonder if she wears face paint. That'll be interesting. We can ask her that, among other things. But on a serious note, she has been a psychotherapist for over 30 plus years, and she's helped everyone, all walks of life. And it's not so much just the reading and just dictating what she's read or heard. She's actually lived the life. And her personal stories we're going to hear more about of how she was able to overcome her anxieties and fears and what have you, and how she can give us some strategies to do the same thing. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Been There psychotherapist, How to Live Without Anxiety, Ms. Elke Scholz. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I'm glad you could make it. And I'm sure you are super busy now because it seems like the lexicon that we always hear about now is related to some type of anxiety. It's like, where has peace gone?
Right, absolutely. That's why I started doing the talks and the books, because I felt like I was consistently giving people strategies and working through anxiety.
One thing I will say as a little side note, and it may give people that listen to this a little anxiety, I get a lot of marketing messages, and I got a message right before the call that said, in less than 6 months, we will be in the year 2020. And
wow.
For those of us that have been around the globe or the earth many times for many years, we never thought 2020 would be here, and it's right around the corner, and that caused a little bit of anxiety.
Sure it does. Sure it would.
It's like, I guess we're living our life, and then I think that's probably the more important thing that I'll get into. But I do want to back up so you can talk about your credentials and how you decided to become the anxiety warrior, and what made you specifically get into this modality of helping people overcome anxiety.
Well, as you mentioned, is that I have anxiety myself, and I had it as a kid, and I didn't realize that, and we didn't talk about it, 40, 50 years ago, and a lot of symptoms, a lot of pain and aggravation, frustration, feeling lost, feeling like I had this big secret that there was something wrong with me, and I didn't want to let anybody know, and then finally realizing that it had a name, and it was called anxiety, and it prompted me to do research, to dig in, to find out how I could overcome it. And the short story is I did go back to school, and I earned a master's degree, and I'm a registered psychotherapist. I also do art therapy and EMDR and internal family systems, and what I noticed is in my practice, people were coming in pretty consistently with anxiety, and I thought, wow, and I don't know how your resources are, but we don't have a lot of resources, and that's why I started doing talks and these radio shows, just to let people know that there are strategies, there's hope, you can manage this, and there's a lot of layers, and that also made it complicated. So I'm a practical person, and that's why I really wanted to get that message out there. So that's kind of the quick version.
Sure, and you're on the front lines fighting the battle, so definitely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Salute to you. And you were saying that generations past, people didn't talk about it. And so now it's probably the first generation or the last 20 years or so that we are able to identify what's happening. And before we get into that, you said as a child you felt lost, and you said that something was wrong with me. Sometimes we think that. And I wanted to get your opinion around that statement, something was wrong with me, because maybe a generation ago there was more of staying in line or coloring in between the lines and the conformity. And if you were out coloring outside the line, something was wrong with you. Versus today, there's more individualization, if you will, and it's okay to be different from other people. So was it more of a conformity that you feel that you weren't conforming to what society was asking of you as a child?
Well, I think what was happening was I entered a kindergarten, and my first language is German, and I always attributed it to my speech. Sometimes I switch my words around. Sometimes I talk backwards, and I thought it was because of my first language, and maybe that has something to do with it. However, later I had a mild dyslexia, though that went undiagnosed. So the thing is, I think what was happening is people, I think in a way you're right about the conformity, the straight rows, the lines, and again, people didn't talk about it very much. And I think now as people are coming forward and talking about their struggles and their successes, and you're seeing it more in the media and magazines, and we're writing about it, and the big thing is to really have this conversation and talk about it. And I think that's making it more accessible, and people are realizing, oh, maybe I need to explore a little further instead of hiding and feeling ashamed. And I think, when you say conformity, I'm almost wondering, too, if that includes expectations.
When you say expectations, and again, this could be another generational question, where children today, I'm in the Big Brother, Big Sister program, so that's kind of an outreach with, and so you have some children that have their schedules probably more packed than their parents or other adults, with every moment filled up, whereas in a generation ago, you can kind of lay out in the backyard and watch the clouds formulate. Would that also contribute to anxiety?
I think it's a little bit of the opposite, and good for you to be part of Big Brothers Big Sisters. They're our charitable sponsor or partner. So awesome. I didn't know if you knew that. No, I actually, nature is an amazing way to connect to this planet and to be aware of self and the earth. I think it's the opposite, which is interesting that you said that, because but many of my childhood memories, I felt the best when I was laying in the grass, my whole body, and looking into the sky. That's when I felt the best, and I didn't feel that anxiety. In fact, I would use that to calm myself down. So, no, I think it's the opposite. So it's interesting, though. I think, too, to answer your question, I think you're right. There's a lot of layers to why we're anxious today, and I think it is the scheduling. Media, social media has a lot to do with it. It's not a negative thing. It's just that everything's happening so fast. And we need to slow down, and we need moments to relax.
Yeah, there's so many directions to go in this, and I like to stay holistic, but I can't help but compartmentalize. Maybe that's the male in me. But I want to get from you, since you have the pedigree and all, is there a difference between anxiety and social anxiety?
Yes. Actually, there's a few, and this is what I try to help people with when they come into the clinic. So generalized anxiety is just a lot of people that are highly sensitive are prone to generalized anxiety, where social anxiety is a little more specific. And we have with that agoraphobia, which is also afraid to or nervous to go out. Not everybody will stay in. So, what I would do is talk to the client and say, okay, what is going on in your life? And ask them where they're feeling anxious. So the categories are there, though really it's about being aware of what's causing your own anxiety, and then you can start strategizing. So, I mean, you might have a panic disorder, or you may have a phobia, or you may have an obsessive-compulsive disorder. And, you know, I mean, we would want to figure out what it is that is making you anxious. I don't know if that's helping answer your question.
It does. It's probably a layered question.
It is a layered question. And actually, you know what? One of the things that I do talk about is that I think what's challenging around anxiety and why a person would feel, you know, why you would feel that you're struggling is that anxiety comes from about 11 different places that I've researched, whether it's my clients or myself or the research, and so that makes it confusing because you can maybe nail one thing and think, okay, I feel better today. Then the next day you have anxiety and you use the same strategy, but it's not working, and then you're going, whoa, what's going on here? And so it can feel really discouraging, and I think it's really important that you know, you can figure out these layers, and I'm happy to talk about them if that would help the listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah, 11 different places. It seems that can cause anxiety in itself.
Yeah, and I don't mean to do it that way, but you know what I notice is if you understand, what I noticed is when you can understand where this anxiety, and some of it's really simple. So substances like caffeine, sugar, alcohol, drugs, whether they're pharmaceutical or recreational, can affect the brain and cause anxiety, and even the lack of water. So you might wake up in the morning and feel like totally anxious, and what you might want to try is have just a half a cup of water. And if that's the answer, then your anxiety is going to go away pretty quickly, because what happens is we sweat in our sleep, and when we're dehydrated, our brain will give signals to the body that are very similar to anxiety. So I know sometimes people, I had a client, she tried that technique, and her anxiety went down a couple levels just by doing that. So she wasn't as anxious in the mornings. So that's a real simple one that you can try, and a lot of people do that. And it may not take away all the anxiety, however, it sure can lower it.
Do you believe in that saying that how you start the day is how you're going to matriculate through that day, or how you're going to end that day? So
is that
you're starting out. What's that?
And that's actually a strategy in itself. Is I have a daily practice which I'm happy to share with you, and I think that's very important. And my bedside table is an anxiety warrior station. So it has that glass of water. It has my journal for practicing my gratitude and my vision book, and it has my inspirational reading there, and it has different natural remedies. So if I wake up in the middle of the night and have that feeling where I'm going, I'm not going to go to sleep, then definitely those are all there within reach so that I can have a good night's sleep. Because, of course, if we're not sleeping, that will also create anxiety in our system. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed here in Georgia and other places around the country that in high school they start school later, and one reason was because there are pedestrian accidents in the morning, and then two, they realize that children, as they're growing, they need to sleep more.
Yep.
So the fact that school starts later, it's giving that body enough time to, I guess, make the adjustments while you are asleep.
Yep, and absolutely. And I would suggest, too, as a parent, that you would let your children sleep in if they need to. And I did that for my kids. Sometimes they were late for school, or sometimes they missed the morning. And I know that's not very popular. However, my children were rarely sick, and they also were rarely sad or tired. So sometimes we just need a day off and we need to sleep, and it's just so important to do that self-care for yourself.
Absolutely. And I do want to say just the selfish part of for me is in another life I taught second grade.
Oh,
so,
right, yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that's popular, that's why I want to get your opinion, because it sounds like when you're talking about the triggers from caffeine or lack of water, it seems there's been cartoons, but I'm sure you've seen them also, that the medication suggestions start in elementary school until you live out your whole life. Like every fact of life has some medication associated with that.
Yep.
And that's how. So it seems like that's the immediate remedy. We'll just get a prescription, and then your anxiety will go away.
Yeah, and so there's a few problems with that, and I always tell or say that I'm not a medical doctor, and there is a place for medicine, absolutely. Though I think we are a bit quick. And I think one of the things you've got to do is really trust your body and trust. And so a lot of my clients do come in already on medication. They've been to the doctor and are good doctors, and I say good doctors, well-meaning, also want to solve the problem. So, you have to listen to your body, and it's okay to try this. However, you want to really look at the strategies, because what happens is, and exactly what you said, is the medication starts early on, and then, it doesn't work, so then that medication gets increased. And so by the time an adult comes in, their medication is quite high, and they're also now getting side effects from that medication. So the cool thing is, if you can, a lot of parents are hesitant, so I say to you, please, please listen to your hearts. If you're hesitant, your heart and body is telling you something. It's saying to pause and to do a little more research. And most of the time, and I'm going to say almost all the time, when a client comes in, and it isn't just me, it's when you start pursuing and looking at some different strategies, you can definitely lower your anxiety. And some anxiety is okay. And I don't know if now is the time, but I'd like to introduce a scale, and it's a really great awareness scale. Would that be okay?
Absolutely, go for it.
Okay, so if you can imagine 0 to 10, okay, and why I like that scale is that children, as soon as they understand numbers, they can use that scale, and they can also communicate to their family. So 0 is no disturbance. So 0 means you're calm. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy, but your body is in a calm state. 10 is that you're having that feeling of what I call short-circuiting. You can't put a thought together. It's really difficult to concentrate, and you're very upset. So whether you're having stress or your heart is pounding, it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes you just can't think. So it's that 10 is that scale. So what's really important is start noticing, and I give this to you as homework, is start noticing when you're a 0, and then when you're a 2 or a 3 or a 10. And it isn't that you have to be the same as me. What's important is that you start recognizing when you're going up and down the scale. And the other piece is, and I'm just going to ask you, is what would be a comfortable scale for you? Like, would you be okay at 1, or are you okay at 4?
Yeah, I would say for me, 1 through 4, I think I'm fine with. I'm always looking for something to push, and sometimes just for business or intrinsic motivation, I found that the growth is outside of the comfort zone. So comfort zone would probably be the 1 or 2, but if I'm pushing or I feel that I'm pushed, then I have to be mindful of, hey, is this for my best benefit? So it's a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely. And you know what? And that's, thank you for saying that, because I know, I was doing a talk, and one of the participants, she's really happy at an 8. She says her anxiety motivates her, and she's comfortable with it. Great. I'm not comfortable with that. So, it's important just to know what your scale is and to have that self-awareness in your body, and your body just doesn't lie. So your body is going to be your barometer. It's going to tell you when you're uncomfortable, and just like you said, when you're in your edge and when you're being pushed. So, and that's okay. So for me, is like right now, I know I'm not a 0. However, I wouldn't want to be, because I get excited when I talk about this. So I know I'm about a 2 or a 3, and that's okay. If I were to wake up and I was a 4 or 5, and I was already starting to feel that stress, and I didn't want that stress, I start using my strategies, because it doesn't take me long to zip up to 10. So again, it's like knowing your limits, knowing, what you have in front of you for the day. I mean, we can plan and do our best. However, how can we support ourselves? And one of the things I say, if I can give you 2 words out of this talk or 2 words out of my book, it's awareness, and the other one is practice, because life is practice. So anyway, so I hope that scale would be useful.
It does. It made me think of a couple of things. It made me think of the saying reason, season, or lifetime. And sometimes that could be your experiences. It could be your acquaintances or people that come into your life. And I am just coming off of a severe ankle sprain just from doing something that I could do maybe at an earlier life, So it was like, when you said your colleague or someone you were speaking with was comfortable at an 8, that may have been where I was driven once upon a time. And now that doesn't get me up in the morning. It's like your needs or motivations change.
Yep. So that self-awareness is key. And I think, teaching our children that helps them too, because when they understand the 0 to 10, it's, just understanding where they're at and having that conversation. And it's, again, noticing, when you go out in the sunshine and that beautiful breeze is going against your face, it's like, okay, I'm a 1, or you're chilling on the beach, maybe you're relaxing, or on holidays, okay. Or maybe you're excited about something and something great is happening. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative thing. It's just to know where your body is at and then treat it accordingly. So take care of it. Another cause is physiological. So your body, it could just be, hormones. You mentioned being out in nature. Well, when we're in nature and we're physical, our body, and it produces endorphins, which lowers anxiety. So exercise, so many people have said that their exercise routine is the best mental health strategy. So, making sure that you keep active, and also really paying attention to what you're eating. And I talked a little bit about that for substances. So.
Sure. I was just wondering, when you deal with children, and it's often said that children are the best teacher, that
yes.
when you're dealing with them, they may be mirrors of their parents, and so they're exhibiting things that maybe a parent has pushed down. And
Yep.
I was just wondering if you wind up treating them both at the same time.
Yes, actually that has happened before, and whenever I do, if children come into my practice, I definitely see the parents and consult with them. So it ends up more like family therapy. And you're totally right. If your child is experiencing anxiety, is how can you best support them. And hopefully you'll find a therapist or a coach that will support both of you, because when that child goes back into the home, you want to help and support the child with the strategies that they've just learned. So, yeah, absolutely. And usually the parents, when that happens, they go, oh, you know what, I'm going to use those strategies too. So that's always good news.
So you work in group settings, it sounds like.
Sometimes, yeah. Most of the time it is individual, though when children come in, then absolutely I'm happy to work with the families.
One of your videos on your YouTube channel I was watching, it was talking about relationships, and that there's 3 relationships. If you're between you and one other person, there's your take, the other person's take, and then the actual relationship. Do you approach anxiety in the same way, like when you're speaking with colleagues at work, from like conflict resolution to romantic interest?
Okay, can explain the question a little bit more. I'm not sure what you're asking.
Yeah, I'm kind of, again, being layered. And so I was just looking at it from like a relationship standpoint. People get into relationships with friends. It could be friends, work acquaintances, or romantic relationships, right? And everyone deals with anxiety, or they deal with situations differently. Have you found that it's good to, from a communication standpoint, to at least understand how people approach certain circumstances, and because then I think you will find more compatibility that way, as opposed to some of the movies that we see where things go off the rails rather quickly.
Absolutely, and so the way I'm hearing that too is that in a group setting, and if that is a couple or a family, is that helping your family members understand that maybe one of you may have this type of strategy, and someone else may have another strategy. And not everybody feels anxiety the same way. So if you're highly sensitive and you have highly sensitive members in your family, they're going to be more prone to generalized anxiety. It just comes with being highly sensitive. So then there's strategies for that. And yeah, it's an understanding that everybody's going to deal with it different. And the other thing is we already have tools. And the fact that you and I are talking here, on the podcast, the fact that people come in and they have professions and jobs, they're already high functioning. The fact that the kids are in school, they already have strategies. We all have strategies, and what we want to know is a few things, is that those strategies are healthy, so that they're supportive, and then understand that, a strategy that works for you may not work for me, and that is really okay. So, it's like I always hope to offer like a smorgasbord, and I always welcome that people say, no, that one isn't working for me. Okay, fine, then let's try another one. And I think, again, the key is when you do your daily practice is find strategies that work best for you, and not do what I do or you do, but or what someone else does, is, listen again to your body. If it works for you, awesome. And then go in that direction. And the other thing is daily practice. Make sure you're doing it regular. Make sure you're taking care of yourself on a regular basis.
One strategy that you use is EMDR, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that for the audience and how you complement that with because it sounds like an alternative strategy versus the traditional psychotherapy training.
Yeah, and I don't tend to use the EMDR so much for generalized anxiety. I use it more for trauma. If somebody is really struggling with anxiety, there's a reason that if the anxiety is consistently intense, then we want to dig deeper. And so I tend to use the EMDR for that. I also, I think that's That's kind of how I use it. So,
Okay.
so and post-traumatic stress for sure can cause, that is one of the layers of anxiety. And when that happens, or traumatic memories, you really do want to seek out a qualified therapist for that. But there's a lot of things that you can do on your own. But if you're dealing with trauma, then I would really encourage going to therapy.
Okay. And I want to stay there for a second when you're talking about trauma, because in the mainstream media a couple of weeks ago, there's a rapper or entertainer now. And he does movies and everything. His name is Common. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. And are you familiar with him?
No.
Okay. No worries.
I'm not so good with names all the time.
Oh, no worries. So at any rate, he's an actor now. So he's in this movie, and I mean he was doing a press run because he had a book that just had come out, right? And it's about love and all this. And so anyway, he was talking about a movie that he was recently acting in, and in the movie he had to deal with the subject matter of abuse, childhood abuse, sexual abuse, and it was abuse from another male. And it wasn't until he was acting in that movie that it was triggered. And so he was like, he's an adult now, and he's like, I don't even remember that happening until this movie. So it was a trigger. So how do you explain both levels of trauma, where trauma, like you said, someone coming from a war and coming back and dealing with that, versus someone that's had some trauma that was hidden many layers below the surface?
So what do you mean explain it?
Well, yeah, how do you, one, I was just trying to understand, because, it was just huge. We all potentially may have something that happened in our lives that we've buried, right? Yeah. If that's some level of trauma.
Yeah, so okay. All right. Yeah, and
okay.
And it's not that – it's interesting that you say that, because at some level perhaps we all do have some kind of a trauma, and it's to recognize it. So if you've been traumatized, let's say by clowns or by chickens, I mean, if you know what that trauma is, it may be easy for you, or fairly easy, to stay away from those triggers if you know what they are. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. So, but in a case like, and it's interesting that you asked that, because the brain doesn't differentiate small traumas and large traumas. So we call them little T's and big T's only for the cognitive mind. And so your brain might grab onto a trauma like falling off a bike and hold on to that, though it may not be problematic for you. And the brain, I just want to encourage you too, is the brain's equipped to process trauma. So like the rapper, he may have processed a lot of it. And, until he was face-to-face with it again, he was triggered. So that could happen. Perhaps somebody else, you might have found that you were in a car accident, but years later, you talked about it, and it was not a great memory, but there's no charge in your body, and you're not having anxiety because your brain is equipped to process trauma. So what happens sometimes is, and I say sometimes, is that, let's say our dear veterans, they've been exposed to multiple traumas. The brain can't catch up. So all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but there's an accumulation of trauma, and it's like a filing cabinet that all these files just aren't filed properly. So, and it's just too much. So the brain goes on overload, and thus we have post-traumatic stress. Does that explain it a bit?
It does. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, and
And
I don't want people to be worried. I took a workshop a few years ago, and it was for therapists and service workers and coaches, and it was a theater exercise, and it illustrated that most of us have been through stuff. So, and I remember the instructor saying, this isn't to create trauma in your life or to have you think, oh, no, I'm not dealing with something. It's just for awareness and for compassion and curiosity. So, if you think that something has happened and you're getting triggered and you don't understand why, then absolutely I would encourage you again to seek out a therapist. If you understand what the trigger is and you're very well aware of it and you can avoid it, then and it doesn't wreck your life or doesn't interfere with you thriving or having a great life, then, carry on. It's not that you have to always go to therapy or unearth something.
Sure, and thanks for that. Thanks for that.
I don't want our listeners to worry.
Right. Well, it made me think of when you were saying that some people are comfortable on that scale at an 8, and the negative connotation would be, oh, that's a drama queen. Like they always want drama, and that could be some level of anxiety. Like, oh, it's too calm. I need to create something artificial so I still can have that level of anxiety, maybe.
Yeah, or stress, and it's interesting too because people have said, well, is stress the same as anxiety? And anxiety, it's a funny word, really. It means to worry about something that hasn't happened, so it's anticipatory fear. And yet the symptoms there's so many symptoms, and they range. And is it from stress? Is it from anxiety? I mean, sometimes we don't know, and sometimes the anxiety causes stress, or does the stress cause anxiety? So I don't think we need to worry too much always, some of the names that we use. And I think that's the same with post-traumatic stress is, really, again, notice what your body's going through. And if you can cope with it, and I guess when I was saying about the 8, this person doesn't always stay at the 8. They just have fun there, and they don't mind it. It's not something that, is regular for them. But again, it's, up to you. And you know what? It's whatever makes you happy and helps you thrive in your life. So I think it's just be aware of it.
Yes, I agree, and thank you for that. And when you're talking about awareness, I've had conversations with veterans, but I've also had similar conversations with like professional athletes. And as you were saying, the brain is anxiety is something in the future tense, right? But the brain doesn't know because it's all happening at the present moment.
Right.
And so with these athletes or veterans, they were saying that when they were in that heat of the moment, they felt alive. And now that they're no longer in it, be it they retired, they miss that feeling or living at that 8, and they feel like something missing, and they can't relive that on some level.
Right.
How do you adjust to that?
Well, presence is, we would talk about being in the now or being present, and I think being present does make you feel alive. So when we're currently present, when we're really aware of where we are, what we're doing, that's pretty exciting. So if we can get to that place, and it doesn't require being on the edge of our lives. I mean, there are a lot of people, they go for that, whether they're a race car driver or parachute jumper or they're running rapids. It's not always necessary. You might want to try being very present, whether you're in your garden, whether you're cooking, whether you're with your children. That can be really exciting. So, and that's something I practice myself, and I encourage my clients to practice is presence. And then we don't worry because right at this very moment, life is really good. So, we're being present, and we can feel pretty inspired, pretty passionate by being present for sure. And of course, there's all little offshoots on that. We could do another talk on passion and being present.
Yeah, if the person's if they're not present, they're like, "Oh, where are you? Come back here."
Absolutely, and we do it, right? And I think that happens is we get futurizing, and it's not. And again, it's not about. It's okay to plan. However, but if we're living in the future, or if we're living for that next appointment or the next event, we're not being present with what's going on right now. And the now is exciting. I mean, it's fun, and there's all kinds of things that happen when you're present. So, you don't want to miss it.
Could you stay there for 1 second? Because I constantly work on this, but I've run into other people. I guess we were called type A's or capital A's, but it's like you're saying you're always living for that next win, where you just had a win and you don't even appreciate that.
Yep.
So it's the perspective of, like you said, staying present, but how do you marry the two? Like, I don't want to rest on my laurels, and I still got to work on tomorrow's win. Can that be done? Can you do both?
I think so. I think that's the rest of that is called balance.
Yeah.
And you know what? Again, I want to just encourage you because, sometimes we get a lot on our plate, and actually that's a cause of anxiety is reality, and some things will cause anxiety, like a job interview or perhaps waiting for test results from the doctor or an exam or, planning for a big trip, or getting married or moving, all kinds of things. And again, it's just knowing, what your limits are, and knowing that reality, you might have some sleepless nights. I had a client come in, and she had so many things on her plate, and I just said, whoa, all that would create anxiety for me. And she said, oh. And I said, you just have a lot on your plate, and it's stressful. She was trying to find a home for her kids, and different financial things were a challenge, and those are all things that create anxiety. So once she realized that it was natural to have that feeling, she just basically literally rolled up her sleeves and said, I can do this. I said, yeah, you can. It just won't be very comfortable for a couple weeks. She goes, that's okay. I can do this. I'm okay. I get it. I'll just be anxious for a little while till I get this sorted out. And I said, yep. So I think, realizing that what's the cause, and if you can see it, then you can just go, okay, like life isn't always perfect and rosy and smooth. Sometimes it dumps on you, and sometimes you have to just go, okay, I guess I just got to work at this and figure all this out, or, get to that exam and know that I might not sleep very well for a couple nights, but I'm going to really support myself. I'm going to eat really well. I'm going to, maybe take some extra nutrients, and I'll get through it. And just know nothing's wrong with you.
In the example you just gave, it sounds like eating an elephant. And so, the popular saying of how do you eat an elephant? And so how do you help someone prioritize, like you were saying, if I'm juggling 5 things, to me they all may be equally important. How do you help a person eat the elephant without the indigestion?
Well, it's hard because I don't have the pieces in front of me. So I always say, what, if that's an option, I'm happy if someone would say, okay, here's the list. So what we would do is we would look at your list, and just go, okay, and I could help prioritize. Sometimes just having somebody on the outside looking in can help prioritize, and it could be, it could be anything. There's so many variables, right? So if you had specific something versus something, if they're going to cut your hydro off tomorrow, then, boy, you've got to deal with that right away. If you've got a whole week, but you've got to, get your kids to the dentist, well, then get your kids to the dentist first, right? So it's like prioritizing your timelines, and, I think you can do it. I'm very positive, so I just believe we can pretty much do anything, and we always do. When you look around, people manage. We get through.
Absolutely. The resiliency, when you, like you said, I think that's part of your daily practice with the journal of gratitude. You're like, wow, I'm still here. How did I still make it after everything I've just gone through?
Yep. Well, sometimes it's perspective, and, I look at you and I are sitting at different places on this planet that's traveling 60,000 miles through space, and it's held by gravity to the sun, and we have absolutely no control of that. And that kind of puts things in perspective. So, when I look at that, and then if I'm worried about a broken truck or repairs, which is just a scrap of metal, is just put it in perspective of what it is. So, if it's a child or somebody else, my dog's barking. Oh, hang on, I'm just going to let him out. Whoa. Anyways, I don't know if you can cut that out or if it's necessary.
No, I think the dog had some anxiety and needed to let it go.
Well, he's just a greeter. He's going out and greeting a friend. So he's just a really mouthy dog, and he has a great lung capacity. So it is very loud. No, he creates anxiety for me sometimes, but he's actually a really good dog. So
I think that's a good point as far as leaving it in for that point is pets. Pets, in many respects, can help reduce anxiety. What's your position on that?
Absolutely. We do an event called Anxiety Warrior, and we have Therapeutic Paws of Canada show up with teams, and this year we had a horse doing equine therapy, and it was amazing. Yeah, animals are truly amazing. Just the spirit of a dog calms people. Sometimes my clients are just petting him for the whole hour, and he just stands there and takes the petting. And I've actually done equine therapy and participated in it, and it's amazing how these horses respond. They have a very large limbic brain, and they can take the energy, and they're pretty amazing.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% with that one. I want to ask you about how things progress. And so, not too long ago, there were two different lines in the sand if you were a chiropractor and you were a medical doctor. And now, in some respects, not 100%, but in greater respects, they respect each other, and they often refer business to each other, and they often work with each other.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, as a psychotherapist, do you have or are you having growing relationships with the medical community? We were talking about medications and such. Do they seek your expertise to complement what they're offering?
Absolutely. And more so now, which is really exciting. So, like I said, I think there's a place for all of us to work together, and there's definitely, like I say, my good doctors, they're there to help people, and there is a place for them. So we need to work together, and yes, I get referrals from doctors, and we work together, and also chiropractic, naturopathic, massage therapists, absolutely, because we're a whole system. So just as a car goes in for maintenance, that's what we need too. So not everybody is an expert on everything, And absolutely, we want to work together. And just too, when you mention that, is a lot of my clients, like in anxiety, whether it's anxiety or trauma, can create a lot of symptoms in the body. And once the mind is calmed down and the brain is healed, a lot of these symptoms go away. So always, though, I tell clients, I'm not a medical doctor. Make sure that you are talking to your doctor. We do definitely work together because you don't want to miss a physical symptom. And so, yeah, definitely it's a team relationship for sure.
Are you familiar with Louise Hay?
Absolutely. She's one of my heroines.
Isn't she? She's awesome.
Yeah.
And the reason why I bring her up is because as you were sharing that, it made me think of the book You Can Heal Your Life. Are you familiar with that book?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite books. I have a few of the gift editions. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's got a painting on every page. It's so beautiful. And actually, a lot of people have thought my book, my own book, is very similar to hers, not so much in content, but in the cover. So, and I didn't know about her when I published my first book, but I have this big colorful heart on the front, and I think she uses hearts a lot. So, yeah, she's a great fan, I'm a great fan of her, actually, and I know she's not with us anymore, though. Her spirit and her YouTubes and her resources, I'm sending people there a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like what you just said, that when you said we're traveling through space, that we're all connected on some level. You didn't know about her at the time you were doing your books, and it had a lot of synchronicity there.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
I love it. And so I want to give you this time to talk about your books and Anxiety Warrior 1 and 2. I was just wondering, before you give all your information out, are there any plans to make that into a movie?
I wouldn't think a movie because it's not so much a story. Maybe, though. Having said that, Anxiety Warrior 2 has quite a few stories in it because people have said, if you could do it, like I have anxiety and public speaking wasn't on my bucket list, and yet I do it because I'm so passionate about it. I believe we can manage this, so the passion does overcome my anxiety for stepping in front of audiences. Anyways, the stories, yes, maybe about the stories. I don't know. It's a cool idea. I'm open to it.
You heard it here first on the Intrinsic Motivation podcast.
Awesome.
That's phenomenal. So, yeah, how could people get those books? I believe you have a third book, and just to get in touch with you for any type of psychotherapy, working with generalized anxiety, social anxiety, or trauma, it'd be perfect if you could leave your information so they can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. So Anxiety Warrior 1 and 2 are available anywhere, and that's whether it's Amazon, Chapters, any of your bookstores. You can Google it, and it'll just show up. You can also, if you want to order it from me, you can. However, I think Amazon does a lot of has a lot of shipping options and things. The same as Loving Your Life. It's available internationally. It's also Anxiety Warrior 1 is now also available in an audio version. So that is really cool. That just got launched this spring, and we're going to be doing Volume 2 as an audio as well, because a lot of people, reading is not an easy thing to add into your life, but certainly when we're driving, or we can put on headphones and do something else and listen. So that's kind of cool. And so yeah, they can pretty much, if they Google it, it'll show up. If they want to get into my website, probably www.lovingyourlifebook will get them to my website, and there's a lot of free resources. I'm actually going to be adding more resources. You don't have to sign up for anything. because I believe if you have anxiety, you just need it now. You don't need to worry about somebody, or registering or anything like that. So there's resources on my website that are free. You can just go ahead and download them. You mentioned YouTubes. There's lots of YouTube's interviews. We're going to create a media page, so again, to help people. So I always help in that mode of if it can help you. And, I encourage people to get the book because they're not very much money, and I've done that by design. They cost less than a pizza. Most people can buy a pizza. The strategies, my editor is really a phenomenal person, and they're really easy to understand. So, you can work through some of these strategies. And if you're still stuck, totally email me, call me, and that's all on the website. So lovingyourlifebook.com.
Fantastic. Well, you have just been in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza with Elke Scholz. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Let's stay in touch.
Yes, I would love that, and I'm happy to add more value anytime I can. Thank you so much for asking me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.